With the launch of Pillars of Eternity in 2015, Obsidian Entertainment brought us for the first time into the fascinating world of Eora, a fantasy setting inspired by the Renaissance and Age of Discovery, mainly defined by the existence of souls, reincarnation, and how this would affect the course of history and development of cultures and societies. Obsidian created a rich and interesting history for Eora in the first Pillars game, that was later greatly expanded in the sequel, Deadfire, and now once again with Avowed. But before delving into the timeline, we need to briefly talk about the calendar most commonly used in Eora, Ani Irokyo. It's not the only one that exists within the setting, but it's the one that better aligns with the orbits of the sun and the moons of the planet. The world currently finds itself in the 29th century, meaning the 2800s, but something to note is that all civilizations aren't older than 4,000 years old, with some being far more recent. As such, the dates for events in the far distant past are mostly speculation and estimates based on the available lore. The earliest known information concerns the first few migrations of Amawas, a race of tall and strong people, across the world between 17 and 12,000 years ago, mostly limited to the coastal areas of continents as well as archipelagos. Eventually, small differences began to appear between the ones that settled on continental coast and the ones that settled on different islands. 9,000 years ago, the elves that inhabited the continent in the south pole of Eora, known as the White Dead Ones, had their first contact with Amawas from the Deadfire archipelago, probably when they reached the southernmost islands of the Deadfire that aren't that far away from the South Pole. Between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago, we can find the first signs of civilization among the Amawan tribes of the Deadfire known as the Huana. In the following millennia, they would slowly develop culturally, technologically, and politically until unifying to create a great empire that encompassed the entirety of the archipelago, building the magnificent city of Ukaizo to be the crown jewel of their empire in the first century of the calendar. Also in the first century, according to estimates, arguably the most important civilization in the history of Eora began to form, Engwith. A prominent and infamous figure in the early history of this civilization was Otnua, a tyrannical king that succumbed to madness after losing a son, financing inhuman experiments, often using his own people, in an attempt to resurrect his son through the manipulation of the cycle of reincarnation. His actions cost Otnua his kingdom and his life, but kick-started the study of souls among the Engwithans. Around the 3rd century, a new culture emerged among the groups of humans that previously migrated to the western continent. These humans usually referred to themselves as the people of the deer, or in their language, Aedyr, originating the name that would later be associated with the entire continent they inhabit, although during these times they were almost always at war among themselves or against elves. Between the 6th and 8th centuries, the Engwithans discovered, through their study of souls and reincarnation, that this was a natural occurrence and the gods they attributed to didn't exist. This revelation threatened to undo the religion that became one of the pillars of their civilization, so they kept it a secret and began devising plans for the construction of giant machinery that would control the flow of souls, both to control the cycle of reincarnation and to gather and combine enough to be able to create gods and the titans their souls will live in. But this self-imposed task was too much for the Engwithans alone, so they sent emissaries to the Huana and tricked their king into helping in this mission. Together, both civilizations built the necessary machines across their lands, with the most important ones located in Ukaizo. The Engwithans now only needed vast quantities of souls, so many they had to sacrifice their entire people as well as the city of Ukaizo to create their gods. One of these deities granted special abilities and immortality to one particular Engwithan individual with the task of eradicating all fates that didn't follow the new gods, starting an inquisition that lasted centuries and a millennia-long conspiracy to hide all evidence of the gods' origins as well as force technological stagnation, so no other civilization could find out the truth through the study of souls. As part of this plan, one of the machines built in Ukaizo was designed to cause violent storms upon being activated, making it almost impossible to reach the city and splitting Eora in two with a wall of storms. Decades after, dwarves, elves, and Orlans were guided towards what was the heart of the Engwith civilization in the continent of the Eastern Reach, and convinced to settle there with the divine task of protecting the now empty Engwithan cities from looters and explorers, and simply not letting anyone enter, becoming known as the tribes of Eora. In the first centuries after the creation of the gods, there were many occasions in which the truth was almost revealed. One required direct intervention by one of the goddesses that deemed the best solution to be launching one of the 3 moons of the planet into the surface. But before the impact, another one of the gods put itself in the way of the moon and stopped it. This incident convinced all the gods to abandon their titan bodies and stop intervening directly in the physical world. At the beginning of the 9th century, one group of Amawan refugees that fled the Deathfire archipelago because of the violent storms settled the rocky and still very much storm-ridden coast of the continent north of the Deathfire, in those lands founding the Kingdom of Rauatai. Around the 1300s, the Empire of Gran Valia was established in a continent to the south of Aedyr. In the 2200s, almost 2000 years after first arriving in the continent, the human tribes of Aedyr unified under one king to form the Kingdom of Aedyr, marking the beginning of a territorial expansion that only stopped when they reached the borders of the Elven Kingdom of Colonial. Between the years 2298 and 2299, after decades of tension and skirmishes, a war erupted between Aedyr and Colonial, although it only lasted a single year. In the peace treaty, both kingdoms agreed to unify under the symbolic marriage of the human Aedyrian king with the Colonial Elven queen. This merger is recognized as the beginning of the Aedyr Empire, marked once again by the expansion of their borders. Centuries after, in the year 2602, Aedyrian explorers discovered the coast of the Eastern Reach, as well as the Engwithans. 21 years later, in 2623, 2 ships departed Aedyr full of colonies to permanently settle in the new continent, although they were massacred by the Engwithans shortly after landing. But this didn't discourage Aedyr and later Gran Valia from setting up multiple colonies across the Eastern Reach. The discovery of Engwithan ruins and their ancient, strange, and extremely valuable artifacts created an entire market that only attracted more and more colonists. In the year 2626, a war broke out when a group of these colonies destroyed a menhir sacred to the Engwithans, who were already enraged by the Aedyrian plundering of the Engwithan ruins. To avoid losing access to the valuable Engwithan artifacts, the Aedyrian king elevated the colony to a duchy under the name Dyrwood, something that came along with an increased military presence. The war ended 5 years later, in 2631, when the Duke of the Dyrwood negotiated a treaty with the Engwithans in which they accepted to stop plundering the ruins in exchange for the attacks on colonial settlements to stop. This was done without the approval of the king, and it also enraged the Aedyrian nobility because it stopped the flow of artifacts. In 2641, Gran Valia suffered an economic collapse that led to the slow disintegration of their empire over the following century. One after another, the Valian colonies in the Eastern Reach took advantage to declare independence, becoming known as the Valian republics. Seeing the decline of one of their main rivals, in 2643, Aedyr established a new colony north of the Dyrwood with the intention of cultivating a plant used to create expensive purple tints, their trade being dominated by Gran Valia before then. Minorities were sent to this new colony, named Reatzeras, to work the land, but poor harvest and an even worse colonial administration left the colonies poor and starving. By the year 2652, a small war erupted between the Dyrwood and Eora when it was discovered that the king of Aedyr was secretly funding expedition to plunder Engwithan ruins. The natives ferociously attacked the colonies and instigated a revolt among the slaves that worked the plantations, but despite early successes, they were defeated by the Dyrwoodan armies with little to no help from the king. Coming out a decisive victory from a war caused by the king's greed, in the year 2655 the Duke of the Dyrwood sent an ultimatum demanding more autonomy, that the empire begrudgingly accepted. This autonomy allowed them to negotiate and sign a new treaty with the Engwithans in 2662, which stipulated the outlawing of slavery and the plundering of ruins. But once again, in 2664, the king ignored the treaties and sent new expeditions to the ruins. Between the years 2668 and 2672, the War of Defiance was fought, the war that followed the declaration of independence of the Dyrwood. The king sent his army and fleet to retake the rebel colony, but the unexpected alliance between the Dyrwood and the Engwithans gave them the edge that resulted in victory. In the year 2708, the Valiant Trading Company was established in the Valiant Republics, company that would come to dominate naval trade with trading posts in each continent and nation. In 2750, they negotiated with one of the Juana tribes the acquisition of an island in the Deadfire, building the Port Mache trading post along with the district of Queen's Birth in the most important city of the archipelago, Neketaka. In 2758, following in the wake of the Valiants, the Kingdom of Rawatai began its expansion towards Deadfire, but instead of trade, they brought warships to take over the islands. Rawatai defeated the Juana fleet, but a counterattack forced them to retreat, leaving diplomacy and treaties as the only avenue for expansion, resulting in the establishment of the Royal Deadfire Company. With the arrival of colonial powers to their archipelago, one of the Juana tribes saw an opportunity to extend their influence. The Kahanga controlled Neketaka, the only Juana city that survived the cataclysm caused by the creation of the gods and that destroyed most of the Deadfire. Large parts of the city lay abandoned and in ruins, but it regardless managed to attract the attention and allowed to negotiate treaties with both the Valiants and the Rautaians, the Kahanga selling their sovereignty one treaty at a time to finance the reconstruction of the city. The Aedyr Empire lost its last remaining colony in the eastern reach in the year 2807, when a revolution erupted in Reatzeras, led by the physical incarnation of a god. Along with independence came purchase of anyone who didn't worship the new divine king, forcing many people to flee south to the Dyrwood, sparking a war between the two nations. It ended 1 year later when the body of the divine king of Reatzeras was blown up using a bomb of unimaginable destructive power. In the year 2809 happened the first of many Hollowborn, babies born without souls that resulted in them being in a vegetative state. In 2818, Rawatai built the Brass Citadel in the city of Neketaka, a trading post that was followed by the acquisition and construction of forts in the islands of Hasongo and Sayuka. Finally, in the year 2823 is when the events of the first Pillars of Eternity take place, and 5 years later, in 2828, transpire the events of the sequel, Pillars of Eternity 2: Deadfire.